My Master's Sandals, Chapter 11. The years went by like the wind that blows and never returns. To speak of the Nuova Trova is to talk about another stage of my life. The Nuova Trova is the movement born with Cuban music, having politicized characteristics in the lyrics of its songs, which delivered a message against government in its form of protest. I got together with some friends to form an artistic band that we called Ahi Hombre. We dedicated ourselves to music to express how we felt about the government. We spoke our thoughts and our perspective of truth, calling out the dictatorship. We were tired of many excessive abuses and innumerable times that we fell prisoners without justification as young students. We were tired of suffering mistreatment inside the prisons, which seemed like pigsties than place for human beings. For no valid reasons, we were mixed amongst real criminals and people who had done bad things. We united to form the group, and although we understood that through music we were not going to impose justice or even change the rules of the game, we found a way to make ourselves heard. Many artists of the time started this cry against dictatorial governments. Through Ahi Hombre, we let our voices be heard. We have 5 members of the band: Buelo, Cacho, Leo, Ajero, and I. We played the conga, the bonga, the bass, and 2 guitars, one of which I played. By the time great artists such as Silvio Rodriguez, Venti Filo, Noel Nicola, and Pablo Milanez were pioneers of the Latin movement, it is worth noting that the pioneer of the Nuova Trova was Silvio Rodriguez. He was born in Cuba on November 29, 1946, in San Antonio de los Buenos. Rodriguez began the Cuban Revolution. He was a teacher, a writer, draftsman, a composer, among other things, him being a television host, which led him to forge himself as a musician. He has more than 500 songs in his name, as well as almost 20 recorded albums. He was the most internationally recognized songwriter award countless numbers of times in different Spanish-speaking countries. Days of Flowers, At the End of This Trip, Women, Cloud Tail, and Unicorn among the most popular of his music. Another of the most important in this musical genre was Pablo Milanez, born in Cuba on February 24, 1943, in a Gramma, Providence. He was imprisoned and suffered a lot of oppression with his ideas against the revolution. After walking his music through different Cuban places with his particular style, he played his first concert with Silvio Rodriguez at the Casa de las Americas in 1963. There was a concert around 1972 that would serve as the beginning of the musical movement called La Nuova Trova. Among the many successes of this famous songwriting group, songs like Cuba Va, Parde de Canta, Yolando, and I Will Tread the Streets Again. We had a beautiful experience traveling through many places within the Dominican Republic. The contacts began and we appeared in many provinces carrying out our protest songs and feelings against the government. We performed many of the songs already known in our countries thanks to the 2 great songwriters mentioned. The band was led by Alejo de Casa, who was the oldest. The rest of the group had an average but frequently less mature thoughts process. Alejandro always had a more advanced mentality, and he listened to the songs of Silvio Rodriguez and Pablo Milanez. He brought us together with the idea the group can demonstrate our position against the government and political ideals. We looked for borrowed instruments because we did not have financial means to obtain them. We got a guitar, and then a second appeared along with the rest of the instruments. Although my friend introduced us to the musical stage, I was in charge of the lead guitar. Alejandro knew my ability because he saw me play many times during my most depressive hours. I gave myself entirely to the situation that required learning, and I applied myself in solitude in a profound way so that I would master the guitar. This was what allowed me to take the lead in a guitar role. The group got their first public appearance in a place far from the capital. We had many rehearsal sessions and prepared for the event. It was an invitation from a college that opened the doors to spread our art. We have had 2 presentations, one on one weekend, in the city of San Francisco de Morales. They were played in a nice neighborhood called Semvillas. The director of the college offered us accommodations in his house. We took the offer. We had basic amenities and very large. We split into 2 rooms. Alejandro shared one with me, and the other stayed in the next room. We were surprised by the beauty of the place, and the director gave us the best care that I can remember in my youth. The next day, after sharing a big breakfast, the director offered us a large space to rehearse. When we headed towards the place, we were met by a very pretty woman with blue eyes. She was beautiful, blonde with white skin. We discussed her beauty and her figure, but likewise we had to respect the house of the person who gave us everything to us. At dusk we headed towards our first public presentation. Naturally, we were filled with nerves. We gave each other encouragement to help calm them. We listened to the hustle and bustle of the audience in the room, and although we could not see them because we entered from the side, we felt the boasts coming from many people. Before leaving, the director approached us along with his young woman we had seen in the house. She introduced herself as the daughter named Caroline. Unlike my friends, I was calmer, but having the presence of Caroline nearly made my nerves begin to reappear. The strong attraction towards the female sex was awakening in me, and I realized that it was the only thing that broke my normal patterns. The director wished us the best, and we walked on to the restaurant. The time had come. We were ready and waiting for the presenter's call. In a few minutes, we heard the name of our group. In time with you, the invited group, Ahi Hombre. Let's give them a big round of applause. Alejo was first, Bueno, Cuchoto, Leo, and I finally advanced, was serenely towards the center of the stage. Alejandro was in charge of interacting with the public while preparing to put our place with our instruments. True to my serene style and confidence, I took my guitar without looking forward, not to be disturbed. Cacho and Bueno were most nervous. Leo watched me as we were walking for a little strength without saying a word. After a short conversation to thanks towards the audience, Alejandro introduced us to the public with our names. He finally got to me. And finally, I present to you the lead guitarist, Israel Kelly. It was the raising of the head, guitar in hand, and turning my entire vision forward. I found an unimaginable crowd applauding before my eyes. I walked every corner of the colossal place without even batting an eye. In seconds, the internal voice appeared, saying again that everything would be well. I was perplexed and excited by the lights that illuminated my face, producing almost intense blindness. To my delight, the voice was piercing me. Suddenly, this time, it was Alejandro's voice that directed towards me. It caused me to bring my attention to the part of what we were living again. Almost 300 people were waiting for us to start our first song. We had rehearsed in the order of performance, and the audience met us with silence, allowing us to play. At Alejandro's command, the sound of our instruments united the hubbub of the people. We achieved the necessary connection with the public immediately, which gave us the go-ahead for the song we were offering. I returned to my customary serenity for a few minutes, still when I saw Carolina and her mother in the front row. I almost doubled over again. The enthusiasm of joy of the people intensified with the endless hubbub. This made us feel like winners, that we were worthwhile. That night in San Francisco de Macorís, as the College of SANDALS, could not have been more unforgettable. After 4 more songs, we closed our presentation. The affection of the people showed us with applaud has remained in my memory ever since. Weeks after our first presentation, and after having left a pleasant impression, we had a second invitation. This time it was to the capital, Santo Domingo. We were invited to the National Library to commemorate Book Week. The passion of what we did increased. Protest music, the Nueva Trova, came to sensitize and awaken the whole generation, which led the way for new thinking and believing in democracy. The people became aware of our opposition that had been experienced in dictatorship governments for many years, and that there was something better available. At this time, the impressive architect in the library retrieved us. We were to play before a crowd that exceeded thousands of attendees at a very large compared to our last show. The voice that never left my conscience was always followed me every step I took. Of course, at this time, since I felt its presence, I did not understand it, and many times it went unnoticed by my thoughts, however, was always there. This was a force that drove me to remain within the tranquility necessary to continue. We went out on front of the gigantic stage and the usual nerves, but within the security of the first applause, we began to play and Liszt prepared for the occasion. We were shocked because the audience accompanied us with their palms clapping in the middle of a song, following the rhythm, impressively singing the lyrics. The people's ecstasy encouraged us to play better, and we looked at each other with our eyes radiant from happiness that we had never experienced. It was great. We had a crowd that tripled in attendance from the one at the school, and their passion for music and giving was great satisfaction. Everything was overflowing with success. Everything was going great until suddenly many people located the entrance began to run. We are still singing one of our songs without realizing what was happening when the screams became more noticeable. A few minutes later, we heard amid the turmoil that was taking place, "Police! Police! Run! Escape!" The lights made it difficult for us to see the position of the agents. They were only guided by running and hustle and bustle of the people who left the auditorium in terror. The access door became a danger due to the number of people trying to get out simultaneously. At that moment, we stopped playing. We also ran away, escaping through the back of the premise, a moment of glory that turned into an accident. The police forces broke into the compound because at the time any demonstrations or events that was against government was punished. Our music was considered relentless against them, and therefore punishment by imprisonment. Despite the existing fear, there was a lot of support from opponents of the regime. Even though the music had a critical role in being the message for change, there was a lot of precautions. After the library incident, we had a private presentation at Fast Street this week of the capital city. It was quite a small space compared to the auditorium we had played. Perhaps there were only 150 people in attendance, according to us. Among the attendees were writers, teachers, historians, and many opponents of the government who found an escape and ability to protest in Trova. At times we had discrepancies and accepted going to this fair. We had not lent latent fare from the military. We began to wonder if these shows we were to play were being set up to entrap, imprison us for our musical resistance. It was very common for people to be accused of being communists. Anyone imprisoned for this cause was taken away for an indefinite amount of time, and we did not want to experience that. It was fear that never escaped our group. We had hardly had a library experience in which a significant consequence, but which caused us to hide for a while. However, it went very well for us. We never imagined having such acceptance by others when it started just for a love of music. In this way, we increased the public's liking to having presentations in different places. Sometimes we would play clubs like Hector Diaz, Los Troces, Villa de Savaro. We played in schools, not only the capital, but also for the interior of the country. This brought the state great experience and success to an entire group remembered as Ahi Hombre. My Master Sandals, Chapter 12. My name is linked to the religious family line. We all carry biblical names, and of course, I was not the exception. The Watchtower, a magazine, has read a lot. It comes from the religion of Jehovah's Witnesses, which has its ideas based on Christianity and has faithful following throughout the world. When I was approximately 18 years old, my friend Alejandro de la Casa invited me to participate in the Gnostic Lodge meeting. He belonged to the group and attended the meetings. After a while, he stayed with the perception and did not return to anything. At that time, I studied and learned other religious belief lines, such as Hare Krishna. I was interested in teaching in Rosa Cures. I continued and wanted to learn new things. I accepted the invitation to learn wherever possible. Gnosticism is a scenario, a physiological religious current that can be blended with Christianity. It became heretical. Initiates not saved by faith through forgiveness, thanks to the sacrifice of Christ, but through gnosis and introspective knowledge of the divine. It is known as knowing beyond faith, meaning the human being is anonymous to save itself. Jnanatism is a secret mystic of salvation. The word Giannis comes from the Greek vocabulary word meaning knowledge. In some study books, it appears as the birth before Jesus, where Christian Giannis claimed to be constituted and witness of Christ with direct access or knowledge of the divine. Jnanasis is considered a supreme form of learning through genesis or experimentation, only within the reach the innates. It is the same as produced salvation. It became dualistic, separating matter from the spiritual, considering evil, premonition of significant material before the divine, and salvation as the spiritual. In Genesis, the human being accessed salvation through small spark of divinity through the Spirit, whereby being conscious in his divine character, he knew his truths, nature, and he could be saved and liberated. Those are some of the characteristics and thoughts representing the general idea. My father became a true friend in my youth, and after the 80s divorced my mother and came to have a very close relationship with me. After their divorce, he moved to Street Brahona near Dorate and Paris. On the street, there were many Croatians. In the Dominican Republic, that word would be a neighborhood or place with small rooms mostly occupied with people with limited economic resources. These people share a bathroom and patio. I had the opportunity to visit my father, sharing many pleasant and horrible experiences with him. My father started drinking alcohol after having belonged to a religious sect for a long time. He had remained austere by many things like drinking and dancing. He considered them to be relatively fun, but not very healthy. From accompanying him on many occasions, the habit of drinking also touched my principles. I was young, and I believed that joining in this activity was the best way to maintain my friendship with my father in those moments. It was not appropriate. Parents must teach their children how they should live, and drinking is not part of a very young age. My father was an electrician, so naturally the first thing I dedicated myself to earn a living was the same. I went with my father to every place where he'd be practicing his work and thoroughly learned everything related to electricity until I became a professional. I had been in construction for a short time, but my mother was against it and were always worried about how it could be so dangerous. It should be noted that walking was one of the characteristics of lack of money. Most of the time, 25 cents for bus fare couldn't even be afforded. After making my long journey, I arrived in Korea where he lived. I entered and walked all along until I reached my father's door. I knocked for a few minutes and then I opened it. I always carried an extra key with my father's permission. Because there was no answer, I decided to unlock the door. My father was late in arriving that day and I was getting impatient. By the way, there was not at the time for some form of entertainment to appease the wait, like playing on one's cell phone, etc. There was only a small battery-operated radio that did not attract my attention. After a long time, I had to go to the bathroom. My bladder was asking me for attention. Although I was used to poverty, I always lived in neatness, and I had a toilet called a toilet or cup in my house. I knew I had to run to the corner where they stood the only bathroom, at that bathroom of the rooming house. However, the need was so intense. Between father's delay and the pain I was causing myself, I decided to leave the head towards my destination. I opened the door already with a little sweat on my forehead. I had waited until the last minute to avoid the desire of my mind was blowing with what my urinary system produced. Everything looked very still. I went through each room, mostly occupied by prostitutes who worked on the outskirts of the streets. Logically, they rested during the day and were able to carry out their nightly work. I walked until I finally reached the end of the hallway where I found a kind of certain curtain covering the room. When I hushed voice, almost whispered, I spoke out, sure there was nobody. Excuse me, can I? For the second time I insisted, excuse me, is anyone there? Without an answer, I dared to open it, and there was a small urinal attached to the wall and a toilet next to it. The walls were quite damaged from age, and they were made of cold cement. These were the characteristics of a very small and dark bathroom. I entered quickly through the tremendous congestion of liquid became more problematic. I endured enough that I placed myself in front of the urinal, and I began to feel the satisfaction of emptying. With my eyes closed and my head raised, I enjoyed the magnificent sensation. Suddenly I heard a voice that broke the magical moment, making me jump and being startled and causing the liquid to shoot all over in other directions. Hi, how are you? Don't be scared, boy. Continue. Don't worry. A slender woman about 30 years old had entered the small room with the most remarkable tranquility. Without flinching, she dropped her pants. I couldn't help but watch her. The surprise of those seconds won my curiosity. My eyes closed more than usual. The scene was very daring. It took me longer to urinate than usual. All I wanted was to get out of this place. I started asking my urinary system to return to normal. Although I had just started my discharge to keep my head in a straight figure, my nerves won the battle, and the woman continued to address me. What's the matter, boy? Calm down. I'm only doing the same as you. Very calmly, she continued to sit down on the toilet. A man and woman were sharing the same doorless bathroom side by side. She was much older. The particular thing about this situation is that it was difficult for me to finish without preventing my pants and hands from becoming wet from urine. My embarrassment grew, and I discovered that the door of my father's place was locked again, and I could not unlock it fast enough. Trying to keep from being seen in the condition I was, the woman smiled at me, and I was overwhelmed to the feelings at the moment. And the most important to note, these are normal living conditions at that time. The work father and I was not very constant. We went out looking for work day by day. We used to spend long times together before we had to wait for hours to present us to earn our bread. We used to do what the country is known for, la pachipa, which was one who does not have a stable job to make daily money to survive. We're part of those day laborers. We started a weekly routine, getting small jobs, going to bars. We drank and danced. We primarily frequent a place called El Salon, located at 20th Street, very close to Gomez Street. That was our chosen place. As I mentioned, it was not the best way for a father to relate to his son, but that is what we lived at the time. I'll try to be most considerate in my truth. The precarious of the place made us meet with people of the same level. Women looking for customers was mostly accompanied the tables where the liquor owned the environment. Being 18 years old and my presence in those places managed to get women in their 40s to propose living with me. I declined this proposal. Although I was living everyday situations, my mentality was very different from most of those times. We spent several months working for a food network called Las Picolas de Vitorian, where we did permanent maintenance. Then my father, in his constant search, managed to work for the French people who were about open to a restaurant. Disorder, strikes, and protests always harassed my country. Although we wouldn't have been ideal for it to have the experience, we always at odds with the government, making it more challenging to find a way to live. Thus, after moving to Sabria Pradella, my father began to challenge of working with those foreigners. After a week devoted to repairs and electrical installations, where my father and I worked hard, payday finally arrived. We left very early, making some plans with the idea of collecting extra sum of money. We advanced a few blocks to get the bus, and we found a mob of strikers who were agitating many people to protest against the government. My father and I stayed with each other and instantly decided to continue on our way. The money was necessary for us, and we had to collect it that day, so we headed towards the destination. The streets were left without transportation, fearing the mob would harm any vehicles. About 25 kilometers, about 15 miles from Sandor Pradea, was our destination, UASD, Anonymous University of Santo Domingo. The distance combined and the intense heat in the environment was not an easy task. We had no choice but to continue on our way, having a positive outlook. Between vain conversations, we were advancing with the sweat that dampened our clothes. Our sole objective was to obtain our money. Thirst invaded our throats. Fatigue also took over the little energy we had left in our legs. We were looking forward to collecting the money, buying frozen drinks, and appease us. Then we would find a way back. Half full pockets this time, we had more options. When we were close to our destination, we reached a corner and a group of people came running a short distance. We sensed that they were university students. We were waiting to know what happened so that we could continue. Suddenly, more people began to leave the surrounding blocks. They were fleeing towards us, and after a few seconds, we saw the military command behind them. They were dropping tear gas bombs and firing pellets at civilians, trying to clear the area. Suddenly, we forgot about the tiredness in our bodies and began to run to save our lives. I squeezed my father's hand, and without turning around, we continued direct race back home. My father was exhausted in the first 2 blocks, and I had to help him so that the projectiles did not reach us. The military continued straight ahead, capturing many people who were detained and ultimately imprisoned. I turned to the opposite corner and so he could rest, hiding with other people in a store that was about to close. The generous owner of the premises protected many people who chose to enter his premises. After waiting a long time, we still had 25 kilometers to travel back. We were exhausted, dying of thirst, empty pockets, returning home with the same amount of money we had woken up with. Having endured this situation together made us feel and more connected. We became great friends, and each story built in my life had something to do with my father. We didn't have much work, therefore the food was consumed was reduced to a minimum every day. The lack of money uniting us. We spent hours sitting on the edge of the cemetery. It was one of the Ave Maxo Gomez, known as the National Cemetery. The people who walked its slopes visited their dead. My father told me stories of his youth, and I listened with that great disposition. Thus, sitting is a grave with several of us for our talks. We spent hours without having anything to do. There was so much lack of work, we couldn't do anything about it. One day, my father, before the news story appearing in the local newspaper, told me, "Son, the city is going to remove many of these tombs." Sitting listening, he seriously followed with information he had. "Here is your grandfather. If they get him removed, I will go and ask for money." I did not know whether to take it as a joke or perhaps a real possibility. Adapt from sitting in the grave, looking like crazy people trying to unimportant things. I did not even let my father think again about this, even if it would serve to cover so much financial need. Nothing changed much. We all always had needs and not enough money. In the days to come, my father managed to find a job in a building under construction. We got hired to do everything concerning the electrical connections, which was our specialty. At this time, it was like a little more educated cables and terminals, which my father needed in a good helper. We had better prepared because of me. We finally had a year where we had worked every day. The money, which was the most important thing to us, calmed out of hunger for all that time. For that opportunity, I also had joy for bringing home some extra money for my mother. I had her mind each week I got paid. It was very pleased to contribute to the house and cover natural expenses for a home. It made Mother feel more than happy that I could serve her in that way.